You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. I'm a hoarder who needed an outlet to talk about this unusual and isolating mental illness. And because my hoarding is secret, I started this podcast to talk about it. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? Things here are okay. I am refinding bits of hopefulness in my life, and that is lovely. Happy Hoarding Awareness Week 2025. That is this week when this episode will come out, and the theme this year is hoarding and executive function. Now, I have talked about executive function on the podcast a number of times before, but today what I'm talking about is hacks and tips that help us with our executive functioning, whether or not we are neurodivergent. A lot of the time we hear people talk about executive function and executive dysfunction, it's in the context of ADHD and sometimes autism. But there are a whole range of reasons our executive functioning might be impaired. And something I really believe in is using what works. So whether we personally are neurodivergent or not, there are hacks and tips and techniques that we can learn from people who are that can help us. And if this episode piques your curiosity and you want to hear more about executive function or executive dysfunction or any of those things, I'm going to recommend now some other episodes of the podcast that offer kind of additional perspectives that you might find useful. So episode 183, that was a recent one with Carrie Lagerstedt, was about ADHD, executive dysfunction, and creating hacks and systems to reduce clutter, chaos, and that's what we're all trying to do. Episode 162 with Joe Cavallo was about defibrilling your executive dysfunction. And episode 112 was an episode with Dr. Jan Eppingstall about executive function, executive dysfunction, and hoarding. If that's not enough, we are people who like excess after all. You might also want to check out episodes 149 about ADHD, hoarding, and clutter, 107 things that look like hoarding but aren't, and episode 40 with Dr. Sharon Moraine about Professor Sharon Moraine about ADHD and hoarding. But today we are talking about executive function, hacks, tips and techniques that work whether or not we have been diagnosed with anything, whether or not we identify ourselves as neurodivergent. This is stuff that can help. And if something can help, it doesn't matter if it was designed for somebody else. We can still use it. And it's going to be quite a kind of actionable episode, hopefully, that will give you some ideas. And not every idea I talk about is going to resonate with you. But if one or two or three of them do, that can make a real difference to the way we function in our homes and the progress we make and the way we cope with the world. And help us to kind of get a bit of momentum to improve the space we live in for ourselves and for other people, and to just get one step closer to our goals. Trying to tackle a hoard is an overwhelming and daunting prospect. As you'll know if you've listened for a while, I'm all about breaking it down into much smaller, much more manageable tasks. And this episode is full of tips for doing that kind of thinking. This is not how to plan out precisely the next 6 months of achieving your goal kind of conversation. This is today I'm trying to do this, how do I actually get myself to do it conversation? Because living with hoarding disorder creates challenges, partly with the spaces we live in and partly with what's going on in our heads, that kind of planning, organising, getting started. And executive function, which is all essentially about how our brains manage tasks, is core to achieving what we are hoping to achieve. Because much as we may berate ourselves for being lazy or not having the willpower or not having the determination, often it's a matter of our brains not having the tools to work more effectively or more efficiently or in the way that we wish we could. And I say this a lot, but we do have to think about what we're doing in terms of the sustainable stuff we can do. Big bursts of activity can be really encouraging and can make us make a whole lot of progress in a short period of time. But it's the consistency of smaller changes that seems to do better at creating lasting improvements. And the kind of brain shortcuts I'm going to talk about today are some of the things that might just be able to help move you forward if you feel stuck or if you feel frustrated with your progress. This is a big thing we are trying to do, and if you, like me, get overwhelmed by the massiveness of the task, focusing on what's possible in the next bit, whether that's the next 10 minutes or the next week, but what's in front of us right now, does help it to feel less overwhelming. And we are one step closer to our goal. Even if it feels tiny and insignificant, it is not, because it's moving us in the right direction. So executive functioning is like the kind of control center of your brain. Like, it's responsible for things like planning and starting and staying focused and even stopping ourselves from being impulsive, that kind of thing. So it's this kind of management center in our brain. And sometimes it's a bit skew-if, or all the time it is, depending. It may be that you are neurodivergent or you have a particular mental health condition or something that means that executive functioning is a constant struggle. Or it may be that you've had a series of bad nights' sleep, or you've got a new baby, or you're very stressed at work, or you've just got a bad cold, and your executive function goes off course temporarily. Everybody struggles with their executive functioning at times. Everybody does. Some people seem to have it together, don't they? They know they need to do a thing and they just go and do the thing. But to some degree or other, this is something that everybody kind of gets wrong or struggles to get under control at times. If it's something you struggle to get under control a lot, or if you're really trying hard and just feel like you're failing, that can feel very shameful. We can get full of self-recriminations, especially if we tend towards perfectionism, which a lot of us do. And shame is an incredibly powerful emotion. And we might feel like it's a helpful emotion, like we can shame ourselves into action. But what actually happens is we shame ourselves into more shame, and it's really counterproductive, and we feel even worse. And the worse we feel, the less motivated we are to feel like we deserve nice surroundings, or the less able we are to get ourselves moving. And there is external judgment. Society is often not kind about hoarding, and that can intensify the shame we feel. And all of that is really paralyzing, which can lead us to become completely avoidant of dealing with any of it. And that obviously doesn't help us to move forward. I think sometimes, for me at least, just recognizing that I'm in that cycle is helpful. When I start shaming myself or I feel shamed by somebody else, if I can take a step back and go, oh, that's that thing that's happening. I'm feeling shame, and then I'm feeling like I deserve to feel shame, and then I'm feeling like I deserve to be in a heap on the floor feeling miserable, and then I definitely don't feel like getting up and doing an hour of de-hoarding. Just recognizing that that's happening can help me to step out of it a bit. And also challenging some of it, thinking back to my episode with Casey Davis about tidiness and cleanliness not being a moral issue. We're not morally failing when we struggle with these things. But if we have quite all or nothing thinking, if we tend towards perfectionism, that can then make us procrastinate as well. I can't start this because I won't be able to do it perfectly, or I can't start this because the conditions aren't quite perfect. That can lead to, if I can't do it perfectly, why bother at all? And I spent years in that particular trap. I don't understand how to fix this. I definitely can't do a good job, so why bother trying? And executive function can help us to manage those perfectionist tendencies, can help us to talk ourselves through them, rationalize them, calm them down a bit. And when we have that kind of emotional barrier or cognitive barrier, acknowledging what's happening can be a great start. Trying to think about how can we gently challenge this line of thinking without putting ourselves in a situation that frightens us? But what if I test this out? What if I test out doing something imperfectly? What if I test out starting when I don't know how I'll finish? What if I test out treating myself like I'm a person who doesn't deserve to be paralyzed by shame? What if I test out being compassionate to myself instead of yelling at myself? Let's see how that goes. But being mindful and paying attention to our thoughts and emotions, naming them even, writing them down, or saying them out loud, or just thinking through, okay, what exactly am I feeling here? If you feel like you're about to shut down, or if you feel like you're about to give up, take a moment to be mindful and say, okay, what precisely is going on in my head? Whether I do anything differently or not, it will help me to understand. And that understanding and applying some of the compassion to ourselves that we would apply to somebody else can help to mitigate those spirals of perfectionism and shame. So I'm going to go through some hacks and tips and techniques to help us to manage when our executive functioning feels impaired, feels like a challenge, whether that's an occasional situation or an hourly slog. My first is breaking goals down smaller and breaking tasks down smaller. If we set ourselves the goal of de-hoard the house or de-hoard the bedroom, that can feel, well, that's impossible. Why start? But if we say, okay, I want to ultimately de-hoard the bedroom, but for now, it would be great if my whole bed was clear rather than just the bit I sleep on. But clearing half a bed might still be hours and hours and hours of work. Every home is different. And so maybe clear the other half of the bed is still too big a task. Maybe the goal in that situation is fill one bag from the bed, sort things out until there's a bag that can be thrown away or donated just from the bed. Maybe the micro goal is remove one thing from the bed. And if you're dealing with a hoard of millions of things, that will almost certainly feel why bother. But the reason to bother, first of all, it's one thing removed from the bed. That's still better than nothing removed from the bed. Secondly, it sets you on course a bit because maybe tomorrow you can move another thing from the bed or even two things from the bed. So it starts to create a pattern. The third reason that removing even one thing from the bed is helpful is if you go back to a recent episode I did with Dr. Jan Eppingstall about towards and away moves. It's an incredibly helpful concept. And I've had so much positive feedback on that episode from people who are like, wow, this is so useful as a framework. So removing one thing from the bed is a towards move. And not removing something from the bed is not. Adding something to the bed might be an away move. That will make sense if you listen to the episode. But there are all these reasons why even something that feels insignificant in the face of an avalanche of stuff is actually useful. It makes you feel a tiny bit effective. It's all progress in the right direction. For some people, tracking progress is helpful. For other people, it's not. So think about this one. For me, I count how many bags leave the house. I've done it for years. I have a spreadsheet where I track how many bags leave the house. For me, that's a helpful thing. I also have to be very careful to not start counting everything. I do have obsessive compulsive disorder, which I think is mostly unrelated to the hoarding, but I can get into a trap of counting and tracking a lot of things. So I have to keep that under control. But that one thing, tracking bags that leave the house, helps me. For me, it's a motivator. To be able to look at the counter on my phone or to be able to look at the spreadsheet and say, I feel like I'm really ineffectual. However, when I look at the spreadsheet, I can see in black and white and green and blue and all of the other colours of the spreadsheet that I'm not ineffectual because look, X number of bags have left the house this year. For me, that's helpful. For other people, that's a burden. It's not useful. But if you are the kind of person who tracking something is helpful, and as long as you can keep that under some control so you don't end up tracking 130 different things that becomes an impediment, think about that as another kind of hack that can serve as a motivation. I run de-hoarding accountability Zoom sessions twice a month, where listeners of the podcast and I get together, usually with our cameras off, and we set our own de-hoarding goal. Then we get on with our de-hoarding in the knowledge that others in the virtual room are doing the same. There's something really powerful about the conversations we have in there, and if you'd like to join us, you can grab your ticket for the next one at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/ticket. The next strategy I want to talk about is setting a timer for a short amount of time. If you can't get started, sometimes setting a 5-minute timer or a 7-minute timer, go wild, and saying, all I have to do is start sorting through this pile of things and do that until the timer goes off. It sounds simple, but that's because it is. But just because it's simple doesn't make it not effective. Sometimes if getting started is the barrier, if it's that task initiation problem, your phone ticking down 5 minutes can be useful. If you have trouble getting distracted, so if you are worried that if you pick your phone up to set the timer, you'll end up on Instagram for 3 hours, use voice controls. For me, that is Google Assistant. For you, it might be Siri or Alexa or something else entirely. Cortana, does that still exist on Microsoft? And ask it to set a timer for you. You don't have to touch your phone for that to happen. In the kind of opposite direction, sometimes if I'm trying, usually to take rubbish bags out, and I'm listening to a podcast or I'm listening to some music, I start going, well, I can't turn the podcast off, and I can't take the rubbish bags out until I'm no longer listening to the podcast. And that becomes a real barrier that I can't press pause or stop. I don't know why, but I recognize that was a thing. And I also recognize that what I can do for similarly inexplicable reasons is set the 5-minute timer on the podcast or on the music app. And so I can't press pause right now, but I can say, turn yourself off in 5 minutes. And then when it turns itself off, that's a prompt for me to take rubbish bags out. There's also another technique that you probably have heard of, which is the 2-minute rule. Now, for me, this isn't a super helpful one, but what it is the idea is that if you spot a task that needs doing and it will take less than 2 minutes, do it now. Just do it if it will take less than 2 minutes. And I can see how that can be a useful tool. And if that's a useful tool, use it. For me, I get caught up in how many 2-minute tasks there are, even within my literal arm span. And so it feels like if I did that, I would be doing nothing but 2-minute tasks from morning to night. However, if that's a useful one for you, go for it. The next tip that again may really resonate with you or may feel like that's just not how I think, either of those is fine, is to think about why we want to do it, why we want our conditions to improve, why we want our homes to be different, why we want our lives to be different. And as I talked about in the episode about feeling your feelings, I've been doing a lot of quite kind of colourful visual journaling. And so something I'm thinking about is making a visual collage or something as to the reasons why I'm trying to improve my situation. Other people might do that on Pinterest. I suspect Jan would do it on Pinterest. Borderline obsessed. Other people might write a list. I used to have a list of motivations for sorting things out, and that was helpful for a while, and then it stopped being so helpful, so I don't tend to get that out and look at it anymore. It doesn't matter if something is temporarily helpful, by the way. You don't need to say that's the kind of thing that will only work for me for a bit, therefore I won't do it. What we say instead, I find helpful, is this is the kind of thing that will only work for me for a short while. For that short while, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that it will help. And then after it stops helping, I'll find something else. I have some trust in myself that I'll work something out that will be a motivator. So thinking about why we're doing it, not in a self-blamey or self-shamey way, but just in a way that helps to remind us the course we're trying to get onto, and the reason for that course can be helpful. And if for you that is visual or written, or just spending half an hour thinking about it, if that's helpful for you, give it a go. Another executive dysfunction hack that can be helpful is giving yourself rewards for completing a task, especially a task you've been putting off or dreading. Now, I am not talking about going out and buying yourself something or picking up a new suitcase from the side of the road that somebody's left out for the rubbish. The kind of rewards we're talking about might be go sit in the sunshine for 5 minutes. It might be a nice cup of tea. It might be giving yourself a virtual high five. It might be like the Daft app on my phone where I can push a button and it applauds. Or it has like firework noises. There's all these different buttons you can push for different sound effects. It's silly, but it gives you a tiny little dopamine boost. So something like, when I've done this task, I can ... and something that motivates you. Other people do it the other way around to help them start a task. I've heard from a number of listeners who don't let themselves listen to this podcast unless they are de-hoarding. So if there's an episode they want to listen to and they know that their own boundary is that they're only allowed to listen when they're de-hoarding, they will put it on and start de-hoarding so that they can listen to the podcast. So if that helps you, maybe you've got a favourite playlist of music, and maybe you only allow yourself to put your favourite playlist on if you're doing the task you really want to be doing. Some kind of immediate reward, whether that's during the process of doing the task or immediately after doing the task. So it's very associated. There's a very clear connection between the two. That can be an incredibly helpful way to get yourself moving or to get yourself to complete something. Having non-negotiables is also a really helpful hack when you are dealing with executive dysfunction. And what I mean by that is having certain structures that are very clear in your mind, certain limits, certain parameters that are not negotiable. One of the reasons this is helpful, in fact, probably the main reason this is helpful, is that it reduces the number of decisions we have to make. De-hoarding can involve a ridiculous number of decisions, and that is exhausting, especially if your executive functioning is having a bad day. So for me, one of those is out-of-date food goes, whether it's my favourite food or not, whether it is delicious or not, whether it was expensive or not. If it's past its date, it goes. And because that's a rule, because I'm very clear about that, every time I find a can in the cupboard or a bag of pasta or a bar of chocolate that is out of date, I find a criminally high number of out of date bars of chocolate, and it pains me every time. But that's the rule. If it's out of date, it goes in the bin. And even though that's painful sometimes, it helps because it's one less decision to make. Other rules might be, as soon as a bag for the charity shop is filled, it leaves the house today. Even if it just goes into the car boot, it leaves the house today. Other rules might be, whatever happens, I want the bathroom to be clean and tidy. It might be, if I find clothes that are more than one size too big or too small, or if I find clothes that aren't perfect for me right now, they go regardless. Setting those non-negotiables, I called them systems in a previous episode, having a system in place to reduce the number of decisions we have to make. Decision making is exhausting at the best of times, but especially if we're struggling with our executive function. It can really be an incredibly useful hack to reduce the mental load and to help us to move forward. Another useful hack that I initially heard about through neurodivergent people, but I find that an awful lot of everybody can often benefit from this, is body doubling, or that kind of having somebody else working when you're working. Even if you're not especially communicating about it, just knowing that somebody else is also de-hoarding when you're de-hoarding, or writing their essay for university while someone else is doing it. Whether that's in a work context, if you're at your desk and somebody else is at their desk and they're typing away, that helps you to focus and type away. And that can be transferred to decluttering and de-hoarding activities as well. Obviously, I believe in this really firmly because I run the de-hoarding accountability Zoom sessions where we get together twice a month and we all set ourselves a de-hoarding task, and it's over Zoom. Most people have their cameras off. Some people have their cameras on. People choose whatever name they want to be visible. It doesn't have to be a real name. And we all get on with our de-hoarding tasks in a body doubling way because we know that the other people in the virtual room are also getting on with their de-hoarding tasks, and it helps. And we chat as we go. We talk about, I've just found a whole pile of paper that I didn't know was here. I never know how to deal with paper. Or we might talk about bigger issues around hoarding, like, does anyone else find that they have this experience? And it's such a supportive space. And because the other people in the room are also all people who hoard, there's a kind of mutual understanding, even if it manifests differently with different people, even if one person in the room started hoarding after a particular trauma 5 years ago, whereas somebody else in the room has had those tendencies for their whole life. Whether one person can't get rid of clothing or another person can't get rid of books, there's a shared mutual understanding that reduces the sense of judgment in the room. And it's a really beneficial thing. So that, for me, is a perfect example of body doubling. That's what it's designed to be. If, by the way, you want to come along to a de-hoarding accountability Zoom session, you would be so welcome. You can grab your tickets at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/ticket. But there are other ways to do body doubling. Maybe just have a phone call with a friend while they're doing something in their home and you do something in your home. Maybe just agree with somebody. You're not having a chat on the phone, but you agree that at 2:00 you're both going to do half an hour of a task you've been putting off. It is difficult to find other people outside of the setting of a kind of support group or the de-hoarding accountability Zoom sessions who necessarily has the same problem. But even so, the emotional support and the moral support of knowing somebody else is doing a task they've been putting off while you do a task you've been putting off can be invaluable. Time blocking and scheduling tasks can be a useful technique for some people. I find for me, this is something that works really well sometimes and is absolutely useless other times. So I try it sometimes, and sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't. But sometimes putting something in my calendar at 2:00, I'm going to sort out the kitchen table. There's something about that external reminder that Google Calendar will pop up with a reminder at 10 to 2, and then at 2:00, that's my task. And sometimes that's really effective at getting me started and getting me focused. Other times the reminder pops up and I think, I set that as a goal. It doesn't matter if I stick to it or not. It's not a deadline that anybody I respect set, and so why would I stick to it? That's terrible, isn't it? But it's true. But try it out. Set yourself a schedule or just put things in your calendar to pop up and remind you to do a particular task that you've been trying to do. Trying to make it kind of gentle rather than rigid can be the challenge. And some people just instinctively respond better to being told what to do, even if by Google Calendar, than other people do. So it's the kind of thing, like all of these, that are maybe something to experiment with rather than something to go into with very firm rules. Another executive dysfunction technique that some people find really useful, I certainly do, is adding something I want to do or want to get better at doing to something I already do. So, for instance, every morning I come downstairs and I put the kettle on to make a cup of tea. That is a given. That is the way of my life. The first thing I do when I get downstairs is boil the kettle and make some tea. Something I've started doing, and it's stuck for a good few months, is I go to the kitchen, I fill the kettle with water, I set it to boil, and then I either load or unload the dishwasher, depending on which needs doing. So as the kettle is boiling, I'm either taking things off the table or from the kitchen sink and putting them into the dishwasher, or if the dishwasher has been on, I'm unloading it and putting things where they are meant to go. That kind of anchoring one task I want to start improving on to something I do without fail is incredibly helpful. And it really helps with building and creating habits rather than one-off tasks. Another one that I did for a long while was every time I went into the bathroom, which obviously we all do multiple times a day, I would pick up 5 things and either throw them away or put them where they were supposed to be or make a decision about them somehow. And it really helped me to make good progress on my bathroom because the idea of picking up 5 things isn't overwhelming, but also it moves the needle. So that's a lot of executive dysfunction tips and hacks and techniques. And I would love to hear from you which you already do, which you found useful, which you are going to try, which just don't fit your personality or the way you think. I would love to hear from you. You can always contact me on social media, or my email address is info@overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. There are also, let me remind you of the episodes you might want to listen to if this is something you want to hear more about. Numbers 183, 162 and 112 are the core ones. You might also want to add to that with 149, 107 and 40.
It's the bit where that hoarder shouts out someone wise.
So, shout out this week to a podcast called Ariel and Ned's Daily Tips that may or may not help you. And this idea from Anjali Bhimani is a beautiful way to think about resolutions. Have a listen.
So this is something that I cultivated in my own mindset because I really hate New Year's resolutions. So I like to say you choose your own New Year because the New Year can start anytime you want. Birthdays are a great time to start a New Year. Also, if you go to the National Days calendar, you can pretty much find a reason to start anything on any day. of the year. I'm going to start being sweeter to my family. Oh, look, it's National Praline Day. What a perfect day. So you can really find an excuse to start something on any given day of the year. I like giving myself an excuse to do things right rather than a mandate.
It's also a permission that it's okay to do things wrong because you can get yourself back on the horse faster than waiting for New Year's next year.
Absolutely. Don't mandate it. Don't look at the calendar to say, I have to do it by then. Give yourself that reason, and then give yourself the grace to know that not every day you're going to be great at it, but as long as the majority of the time you're consistently moving in the right direction, you're going to get there.
So I will link to Ariel and Ned's daily tips that may or may not help you in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to that Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.